So we'll begin with meditation as usual. I wanted to introduce today a method that I've been experimenting with and offer it as a way of playing with the breath, experimenting, for those who feel inclined. For many people, or some, they're able to direct the mind directly towards these recollections or perceptions of emptiness, space. But I find for others, they have to move through the body first before being able to release into a more spacious awareness. And where the Buddha gave us precise instructions about cultivating the wholesome and letting go of the unwholesome, for a more detailed picture and map of the breath body, kind of the subtle or energetic body, which we can explore through anapanasati, breath meditation. Looking into the systems of Kundalini or Chinese Taoist meditation can be very helpful. This looking into the various stations of consciousness in the body, these focal points of the mind, is a practice in the Theravada which was really validated and used by Tanpor Lee, one of the most respected teachers in the tradition. But rather than speaking to a complex variety of different chakras or stations of consciousness, I find the simplest way to work with the basic balance of energies in the body and the exploration of them is to divide the body into 3 chambers. One from right below the navel down to the ground. One from around the navel up to the nose or so, and one from around the neck up to above the head. And in Taoist meditation, these 3 parts of the body can roughly be aligned with what they call the 3 treasures, or 3 kinds of flavors of energy. In the lower half, you have Jing, which is essence, sort of this robust life force. It often gets interpreted as sexual energy, if not channeled correctly. In the middle, near the heart, you have Qi, breath, more subtle. And then in the upper chamber, around the pineal gland in the center of the brain and on up above, you have Shen, spirit, mind. And each of these has a very distinct flavor. If you place awareness down in the lower chamber with Jing, there's often a very earthy, nourishing sense. You can imagine roots digging down into the ground and drawing up this deep, nourishing water with each breath. In the middle, there's a sense of love, the heart energy, Qi. And then Shen, up in the head, spirit, is often very bright, sweet, heavenly energy. And these, interestingly, roughly align with the first three foundations of mindfulness. Jing in the lower chamber can be aligned with mindfulness of body. Qi and breath, the sense of love, with Vedana, mindfulness of feeling, and Shen, spirit, mind, with mindfulness of Chitta, mind. So how one can move through these using the active mind to move towards stillness is begin in the lower chamber. Sort of drop awareness there and allow it to circle down the front, into the ground, up to around the navel in a circle. Doesn't have to align perfectly with each breath, but just allow it to sort of spiral like a pump, drawing up that earthy energy. We might also call this piti in Buddhist terminology, refreshment, rapture. It's one of the jhana factors. And just establish roughly a count of 10 breaths. You don't have to track the 10 breaths, but just establish the intention to remain in that lower chamber for about 10 breaths. And this will keep a certain clarity in the background and make sure you don't wander too far, because after 10 breaths or so, you'll reestablish mindfulness, or if you've lost it. And actually, the top of that chamber can touch the tip of the nose, sort of brush up against it, so it doesn't have to be topping out at the navel. It can actually kind of touch that center place somewhere between the heart and the nose, so that it touches each breath. You can just drop awareness there for 10 counts and allow it to spiral slowly up, narrowing until it's spiraling right at the center, at the tip of the nose. And then you can allow it to, for the next 10, remain in that middle chamber, at that tip, just to the tip of the nose. Really keeping careful attention to the breath coming in and out. A singularity. A narrow focus. Consolidated. And then you can allow the mind to release up into the upper chamber, into this bright spaciousness. And just as in the lower chamber, you can let it spiral around that broad, bright space up above the head, down to around the nose and heart, brushing up against it for a count of 10 breaths, allowing that sense of brightness, heavenly, Shen, spirit energy to be felt. and allowing the awareness to slowly spiral in until once again it's consolidating right at the center, somewhere between the nose and the heart. You can let it rest there at that consolidation. And then as the mind becomes energized and wants to expand again, let it. Allow it to just release outwards into a bright, spacious sense of the whole body, all three chambers. But aware of the breath at the center. You can remain there for as long as feels right, about 10 breaths perhaps even, or longer. And then when the mind becomes anxious, just begin again, dropping it into that lower chamber of Jing, spiraling over the count of about 10 breaths to the center point of the nose and heart, remaining at that consolidated center for around 10 breaths. Just really allowing the mind to settle there and tracking the breath delicately. Expanding up into the upper chamber of Shen, allowing it to spiral around that brightness until it spirals in again to the center, consolidating point at the breath and heart. And then after it's consolidated for a time, allowing it to release into a broad, spacious stillness with the breath at the center. And I actually call this the Helion technique after a type of fusion reaction, which is actually being pioneered in Seattle, where they take a loop of plasma and another loop of plasma and collide them together such that they invoke a fusion reaction, which releases a still, powerful magnetic field. So similarly, you create that loop of quote-unquote plasma in the lower chamber and allow it to come into the center point, consolidating. You create the loop of plasma, quote-unquote, in the upper chamber. Allow it to come down to the center point and consolidate. And then fusion occurs, and you release into a brightness. And I find this technique allows a balancing of the different energies of the body. It allows a way for the mind to actively explore the breath. And eventually, it allows a calm spaciousness. And if you want, you can keep a gentle sense of loving kindness in the background as well, or of the sound of silence. As the mind becomes more refined, you might find it naturally rises. And you don't want to go quite as low in the lower chamber, but just dip down a little bit. And when you release into the upper chamber, that awareness is very broad and extends quite far above the head and is infused with a brightness. And that when it consolidates to the breath, it consolidates very precisely and at an increasingly narrow point. That the oscillation between wide and narrow begins to merge until you simply have a sustained fusion reaction where awareness is focused on that point, but also has a sense of the bright, broad field of consciousness.